Okay, we'll call the meeting to order, please. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Cabral, Deputy Mayor Coughlin. That the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater commence December 18, 2019, come to order at 5:03 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. Are there any pecuniary interests in this special meeting? Okay. All right, we shall move on to Director Ippolito. Make a presentation, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and thank you, Council, and thank you, staff, and members in the gallery. So today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a presentation here on off-road vehicle use on municipal roadways and preparation for an item on tonight's Council agenda. Tonight, I'm going to break down the presentation into a couple of items here. First one is, what is an off-road vehicle? I'm going to get into the history of ORV use in Springwater and some of the issues that we've seen there. Purpose and objective of report 9.1 on tonight's council agenda. Get slightly into legislation. I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm going to give the 5 options which are going to be presented. We're going to dive into report 9.1. We're going to talk about the Trail Development Committee, and we'll talk about next steps moving forward. So, off-road vehicles. My apologies ahead of time if I make reference to ATVs. As you can see here, there are 4 different samples here of various types of off-road vehicles that we see here. History of ORVs development in Springwater. And before I actually start talking about that, I broke it down to 2008 to present. However, I'm going to go back even a little bit further than that. Back in 2005, there was a sort of Springwater off-road vehicle working group that was put together, and that was put together because of some issues we had with some off-road vehicles on unauthorized trails or where they were permitted. Some issues that we've seen there. Following the work that the ORV group did, and particularly with some issues we've seen in and around Hillsdale, a number of trails were actually closed because of that. And they included the Old Penetanguishene Road, Baseline Road, and Matheson Road. I can tell you that the presented options tonight, none of them are being proposed to reopen again. Okay? With that being said, just a point to know, we still do have some issues with unauthorized use on these trails as well. So, in 2008, the council received the Trail Master Plan, and the Trail Master Plan discussed a number of issues, particularly when it came down to ORV use. In 2010, Springwater entered an agreement with COATV to allow a limited use of municipal roads and trails. And that has been an annual agreement that we've had and gets renewed every year. In May 2008, COATV submitted a request to open some additional road allowances, unopened roads, and to expand some of their ability to use more of a township's roadways. Public information session was hosted in September 2008. Now, what ended up happening was that there was some concern expressed by the public that notice was not provided in due time, and there was some concern, so it went back. In January, there was a little bit of a follow-up, followed by a report to council in February. In February, it was decided, let's have a couple of public open houses, and that was done on March 27th and 28th, one in Elmville and one over here in the township office. Before we can actually present anything back to council in terms of what we found, we started dealing with some government changes or some changes that were occurring in the regulations. So there was a little bit of a hold that was put up on that. And what ended up happening was that not only one change occurred, but there was about 3 other changes that occurred in the same time. So last one that was just changed, it just was adopted or came forth or received royal assent on December 10th of just last week. Springwater Trail Master Plan. So the report was received in October 2008, and the ORVs was heavily discussed as part of the Trail Master Plan. There were a couple of items that probably best to let council know that were identified in that report. It was stressed that ORV clubs stressed the importance of good land ownership, rider education, etiquette, and responsible trail behavior. They saw that they were more of wardens and ambassadors to the trails, and they do acknowledge that there are some rogue riders out there. When it came down to rogue riders, they said, well, you know what? The problem that we may have is the fact of there's no incentive for the rogue riders to be part of a trail, have a trail system. It's just a little bit too easy for them to start riding, get onto the forest, get into unopened road allowances. So what's the incentive for them to become part of a regulatory system such as COATV? So in report 2.1, I'm breaking it down to 3 different sections. So when we talk about the regulations, I'm going to talk about the points to consider, and we'll talk about the survey results. At the end of it, the objective is to obtain a general overview of the regulations, point to consider, and results of the public survey to expand ORV use on municipal roadways. And when I say municipal roadways, I'm also talking some trails and also some unopened road allowances as well. The hope tonight is that we bring focus on which way Springwater could proceed with ORVs on municipal roads. And again, we're talking about some road allowances, and we're also talking some trail systems. Tonight, I don't believe we're going to be making a decision saying this is what we're going to do, but we're going to have to just want to start focusing. We're going from here, and we just want to start focusing on whether it's 1 or maybe it's 2 options. That way we can start narrowing down and doing some a little bit more legwork on staff's end of things. Current agreement with COATV, and this was since 2010. COATV uses part of the North Simcoe Rail Trail up here, terminates at this point, goes across Floss 4, over to Vigo Road up to Floss 6. Once you're here, you can get into Wasaga Beach, which has permitted ATV use. Currently, it's all year round, no hour limitations. It's anytime, anywhere. I wanted to illustrate where basically the forested trails are currently in the township. So this kind of helps us kind of understanding what was the objective on COATVs. This was something that staff had to kind of see before we actually even put it down in a report, because if we didn't know what the objectives were, well, it was not much good on our end of it. So there are several forested trails or tracks in the township. We have the Hendry track just by Antrim Mills, Phelpston track, obviously in Phelpston or just outside of Phelpston. This is the North Simcoe Rail Trail right here. The black lines indicate the agreement that we have with COATV currently. Okay. Also, even though it is in red, it means it's not open at this time of the year. The Orr Lake Trail, or Lake track in this one section. And the only other one I wanted to highlight is back in this corner, even though it is not in the township, it's the Wildman Tiny track in Tiny Township. And the reason I want to highlight that, because some of the objectives on COATV's request was to get to this track over here. This question was asked, where can they actually be riding on the road? And the regulation states that it's on the shoulder of the road. Now, if there is a situation where they need to go onto the road, the traveled road, they can. If there's a blockage, or if there's a rut in the road, or there's a parked vehicle, you are permitted to do so when it is safe to do so. However, you're going to be on the shoulder of the road. So this kind of shows 2 different examples over here of where you should be riding an ATV on the road. As I mentioned before, the regulations have, not the regulations, but the act has changed through our government. And there was a change in Bill 107. there was a change in the Highway Traffic Act in Bill 132, which just got royal sent on December 10th. And through the course of it, there was some changes that they did in the wording to suggest that there were some additional changes going to be occurring in the regulation as well. So I call Clause B here, the government giveth, but the government taketh away as well, because it does indicate that while they do provide the municipality an opportunity to provide regulations and set the standard on it, B says they prescribe limitations on the authority of the municipality as well. So this kind of made us question what was going to really going to happen on this one here. However, we got a little bit more clarity on it when we looked at some of the summaries of what the legislation really was intended to do. And one of the intentions there was to allow a little more flexibility when it came down to off-road motorcycles. Also, to allow a little more flexibilities in terms of the ORVs as well. Tonight, we're going to be looking at 5 options, and I'll go through each single option here quickly here. Option 1 is pretty simple, really what explaining purposes. It's all municipal roads, and we're talking about the small roads, subsidiary roads. We are talking about anything from Pinery Drive to more major roads such as Golf Course Road, everything. The only exception to that is county roads and MTO roads. We are not the jurisdiction having authority on these particular roads, so we're following their rules on this. Option 2, we expand on it. We're saying, okay, all municipal roads, but COATV has requested that we look at a couple of additional trails or unopened road allowances. The first one is the North Simcoe Rail Trail from Floss 8 up to Queen Street, and this terminates just around Robinson Park, I believe it is. The second one is a small stub that extends up to Old 2nd. This would terminate or come right into Little 9th. In Phelpston, or in the Phelpston area, we're talking about the North Simcoe Rail Trail, and that's extending it from Phelpston, where it currently terminates, or sorry, you're not permitted to ride on the North Simcoe Rail Trail beyond Floss 4, but they are looking at extending that to allow it to go up to Floss 7, and a little stub to connect it over to Floss 4, as well as a little section on Baseline Road down to, that's just before Floss 4. This one section here was one of the trails that was unopened road allowances that was initially allowed to be operated on, but was removed back through SORV's work in 2005. Beaver Lane and Fox Farm Road, we're talking about Beaver Lane going right across, right over to Fox Farm Road, this will be Russell Road down here, and this will be Fox Farm Road right on the very top. Now, I can tell you, if you look at the aerial maps on these, you can see there's a heck of a lot of trails that are road tracks just from the aerial imaging, which means that they are being ridden on already. Option 3, we're limiting it now. We're saying, hey, not all the roads, but let's look at just select roads. And I broke it down to the north section and the south section. North section, Floss 10, right across, over to Old 2nd, or Baseline Road, sorry. And then once you're in Baseline Road, this allows you to get into the Wildman Track up to Tiny Township. What the Township of Tiny have indicated that is that, hey, we don't allow ATVs on our roads, but if Springwater does allow it, we're going to look at allowing it so that at least they can get into the Wildman Track up in the northern part of Tiny Township. This will be Usher's Road over here. On this section here, Vigo Road would bring it right up to this part over here, and once you're there, you can get into Sega Beach. And what are the highlights here? Mill Street will go from Baseline Road all the way across, and this allows you to get into Ormadante this way here. This was another contentious issue back in 2005, the Heritage Trail, and it was discussed that we're not even looking at this one. We refuse to. Okay. Oh, sorry, one other thing, back on this other slide. This actually allows riders to utilize the services that they can find in Elmville, so gas, restaurants, and whatnot. The stretch in Elmville goes from Robinson Park over to Knox, and north side William Street all the way down to Floss 8, up to the south part. On the south section, we're looking at Beaver Lane, going across, Old Second South, all the way across and up to Connecticut, and a small part of Forbes Road as well. And there is a small little section on Gill Road as well. I believe the intent is to get onto the hydro corridor, which is here. Option 4 is to maintain status quo. And that's what we have is what you are only permitted to have. No other changes. Option 5, well, I'll leave that to you. Okay, so allow some flexibility in terms of what we're going to look at. Maybe there's something you liked in one option, but maybe it's something that you didn't like on this one particular option. So there's a lot of flexibility. We're going to listen to what your comments are on this one here. So on the report that we're going to see later on tonight, we had a couple of points to consider, and that was neighboring municipal bylaws, linkage to County of Simcoe trails, County and Ministry of Transportation roads, community impact, enforcement, risk and liability, and public consultation, and the results from the survey. So my apologies for some of the scratches off here because some of the bylaws have actually been amended already or updated. Wasaga Beach, as I said, did have some limitations, but they removed it and they updated it in 2000, actually in, one was October, I believe it was October in Wasaga Beach, and Ormadante increased the number of roadways that they are permitting to be traveled on just in September, I believe it was, of this year as well. Other than that, Clearview has some limited roads it can travel on. Tiny right now has no roads. As I said, however, there is an ability there that they're going to see what we're doing because they may be changing some of their rules as well as part of this, just so they can get access to that Wildman track as well. So we also looked at the linkages to the Simcoe County trails because if you talk to the folks at COATV, they, at least what they're telling me, and I do kind of see this, is that they actually don't want to be on the roads any more than they have to. They want to be on the trails, not the roads. You have speed limitations. You have a lot more limitations. You have wear and tear on your bikes. You have traffic impacts. You just would prefer not to be on the roads at all. So we looked at what's the rationale in terms of where you're going to get to these trails. And this is just, again, the map of where things are around the Simcoe County to see where the county trail systems are. County and Ministry of Transportation roads. So they're not in our jurisdiction. So the county has said that they will look at it. If someone, as COATV, want to present a case to them saying, hey, we want to travel on a certain county road, they will look at it. That's not to say that they're going to allow it, but they will look at it. MTO has a little bit different opinion, and they're much more stringent in terms of what the rules that they are requiring. There's actually a part of the OREG 31603 has roads that they're permitted to be on and roads that you're not permitted to be on. So on MTO roads, what they have told me was that Highway 26 And Highway 93, you are allowed to cross it. We are not allowed to drive along it on the shoulder of the road. 400, forget it. It's prohibited. And most of the reason is because of just traffic on that. And you can cross it at a 90-degree angle, and the county even allows you to do this. So in order to, Horseshoe Valley, for instance, is a great example. You can cross the road if there's another linking trail to it, but you cannot drive along it. MTO has a very similar type of rule as well. Community impact. And in this particular case, we looked at complaints that we have had to deal with. We did have a spike in 2019, and I don't know what the reason is. Maybe it was some of the communications that we had with the review. And usually when it's out there in the open, you will see it gets the people's attentions. And they're going to let you know that there is some concern. So we did see a spike this year. We also had a fairly high number in 2017 as well. Typical complaints we see: operating an ORV on a municipal road, operating an ORV on private property, operating an ORV on municipal properties, ORV on non-permitted trail, noise, dust, speed. Not all these are items that the township can actually enforce, just to let you know. So in the options, what we looked at is on property impact is we had a couple of different scenarios that we have there. Option 1 and 2, well, if we open up all the roads, we may be seeing a dilution of traffic. So if you are going out for a ride on a Saturday and there's a lot of ORV traffic going on a trail, and you're trying to link into another trail, by option 1 or 2, all municipal roads, you may see a dilution of traffic. So you have choices. Am I going to go left and go around Usher's Road? Am I going to go right and stay on Floss 8? It gives a little bit of more flexibility. Whereas some of the ones where you're limiting it, you may be seeing a lot more traffic on those very specific roads. At least that's the theory behind it. What we looked at is the impact and how many properties would actually be impacted based on what we're seeing. So the two main communities that we would be dealing with are Elmville and Hillsdale. In the case of Elmville, if you looked at where ORVs would be permitted to be traveling within the built-in areas or built-up areas, we're talking about ORVs probably passing around 200 properties in Elmville. Some of these might like the traffic for businesses, others may not. Hillsdale was the other one, and this stretch from Old Penetangee Machine Road to Scarlett would impact around 90 properties within this stretch. Now, just keep in mind that in this scenario with Mill Street, it actually proposes to go right across Mill Street over to Old Second. In this particular case, the reason why the folks at COATV wanted Mill Street was to allow an opportunity to come across here and get onto Mount St. Louis Road. That way they can get into the Orme-Dante road system here and then get into their trail network as well, which is not as robust as Springwater's. Can we mitigate some of the impact? Yeah, we can. So under the regs, it does state that there's speed limits that it implies. So if you have a speed limit of 50 kilometers an hour for most cars, that speed limit, the maximum speed that you're permitted to travel on an ORV is 20 kilometers. If it's over 50 kilometer zone, then 50 is the max. So if it's 80, you're driving only 50 max on that one. Hours of operation is something that has also been used as well. A number of municipalities have set limits. Orme-Dante, for instance, has 2 hours after sunrise, 2 hours after sunset and 2 hours before sunrise as their limitations in terms of where you cannot be riding a vehicle. They also have seasonal limits as well. And seasonal limits can have a couple of benefits to it in the case of wear and tear on the trails and the roads, as well as maybe other uses of those trails and road systems, or trails particularly when you got snowmobiles who are also using it as well. In the case of Warmadante, they put limitations by a very nice map where it says these streets you're permitted from January 1st to March 15th. Those are generally by the lake for ice fishermen, or ice fishing, and whereas other areas are just April 1st to December 15th. Prohibited is a section, or most of the sections there are in residential areas. Enforcement. So in this particular diagram here, I'm just trying to illustrate enforcement responsibilities. And I know it's been stated that if you open up all the roads, it's going to be enforced completely by OPP. I would suggest that's maybe not 100% correct. Okay, I think at the end of the day, you're still looking at the Township of Springwater having certain enforcement responsibilities when it comes down to it. OPP are great at dealing with registration, insurance, speed, other Highway Traffic Act issues such as wearing your helmets, safety items on your bike, and other provisions as that. COATV deals with the trail etiquette, rules, and they do have a little bit of a joint item that they do in enforcement when it comes down to trespassing the Property Act, and they do ride the trail systems together with some paid duty officers as well as part of their SAVE program. Springwater, I think, will still be pretty much responsible for hours of operation, riding on non-permitted roads, allowances, trails, or operating on township properties. And I would suggest if we are looking at bylaws, we're still going to be looking at putting some provisions in there, such as restricting use on municipal properties. It is a very common clause, which is in most other municipalities, and it makes a lot of sense just to protect the facilities that we have in our township. Risk and liability. So this was kind of one of those, and solicited some advice from them. And they stated to us, there's a couple of questions we should be asking. It says, A, do we have the ability there to maintain the road if there's increased maintenance that's going to be as a result of allowing ORVs on municipal roads or trails or unopened road allowances? The second thing they said is, how safe are the roads that you are considering to be used for ORVs? So we went back and we found this pretty decent report from the County of Peterborough. And in their particular cases, they actually got into a partnership with their insurance company, and they did assessments on their municipal roads, or sorry, their county roads. So these were county roads that we're talking about with the County of Peterborough. And they said, as part of their assessment, they looked at items such as surface materials, the widths, shoulder widths, traffic volume, lengths of road section, surface conditions, obstruction, sightline issues, and edge conditions. So I can tell you, Peterborough hasn't even adopted what they started in the process. They're still going through the process of reviewing it, and that was in 2018. And I was just speaking with the director who was dealing with that one at that point in time. And they ended up crossing off a number of roads because they found that the shoulder widths just really were not the best for anyone involved, or even the traffic volumes were just such that maybe not the best choice for an ORV to operate on. Increased maintenance. So I reached out with the assistance of our Director of Public Works on this one over here to our counterparts over in Innisfil, Ormadante, and Wasaga Beach. And they've essentially indicated that based on their experience, they have not seen an increase in maintenance as a result of opening up ORVs to municipal roads. And when you looked at what we kind of have experienced, it's pretty much been a very similar type of situation as well. Okay. So public consultation and survey results. I don't go through all the particular items that we dealt with. I just highlighted a couple of very which I thought were good ones to kind of highlight here as part of it. First question we asked was, how do you identify yourself as? And we're trying to see what was the breakup of those who were responding to the questions that were involved. Overall, we found that 67% of those who were responding were, for the most part, recreational riders or members of ATV clubs. So it was very heavily favored towards those typical riders that you would expect. Okay. What highway selection criteria should the township use to determine the roads an ORV can travel along the shoulder or travel portion when the shoulder is obstructed by or unavailable? And this is where they started giving us things that we should be looking at. And they said we should be looking at proximity to amenities, gas stations, lodges, and restaurants, lodging and restaurants. Average traffic volumes was something else they said. Says, take a look at the traffic volumes because there might be some roads that maybe don't make any sense. And they said that we should also be looking at the distance to where the trails are as well. So just not riding on the municipal roads for a joyride, but really to the point of getting from point A to point B, point A being one trail, point B being another trail. Should the township specify that travel on-road is meant only for recreational purposes? An example is travel between one trailhead to the next with a reasonable distance to access amenities such as gas or food. So this, where the previous question was asking about what should we look at, we are very more specific on this one, just trying to get down to the root of what people are looking at. And 55% said that, yeah, we should be looking at some of the amenities as part of it. And no, we should not. We don't really need to look at that. If yes, what is a reasonable distance of off-road vehicle to be on a road? And this is where we're trying to determine if we should be looking at setting a limit in terms of how far they should be traveling on the road. If you look at the distance between the trails, this would have been a very difficult undertaking to begin with. And if you look at the response, it looks like it was all over the board anyhow. 30% said 1 kilometer or less, 88%, or sorry, not percent, 30 responses indicated 1 kilometer or less, 88 said 1 to 5K, 75, 5K to unlimited, 56 started saying get to trail, 37 mentioned the distance should consider gas and restaurants. So I just should qualify that in this particular response, it was an entry ability by the individual. So sometimes they were listing 2 or 3 responses. So we may have seen 1 to 5 kilometers, but keep in consideration where the gas stations are, or keep in consideration where the traffic volumes as well. So the numbers sometimes on this one here would be difficult when you look at some of the other numbers that you're looking at to really realize what it's trying to get to. But this was an entry-level opportunity there. And this one here we asked is, how can we consistently communicate across the township what a reasonable and distance is? And so how can we communicate where are you able to ride on? And this particular set, signage was probably the most common one, and the other one was apps came up quite a bit in terms of responses. Now, apps for the township to develop an app, I'm not sure we're really in a position to do that. However, I can tell you COA TV does have an app, and which I believe just launched not too long ago. And it's basically the images that you saw previous where it showed you the county maps. And you can dive into there and see a little bit more detail if you came in there a little bit closer. Should there be any roads within Springwater where ORVs should not be permitted? And 53 responded they should not be any restricted roads. 44 responded that ORVs should be restricted on permitted roads only. 3% indicate unable to respond or other. And then we started asking this, what the restricted roads are. And a lot of the responses that we were getting were mentionings about highways such as 26, 93, 26, so getting away from the main MTO and the county roads, which, as I explained before, they're not even permitted to go on these roads as we stand right now. If the township were to extend the on-road access to RV, should there be a time and seasonal restrictions? So now we're talking about the hours of operation of that ORV or seasonal restrictions in terms of something like Ormadante, or it was March to November or December. 59% said yes, there should be some restrictions on it, and 41% no. And this question here, we asked, should you basically be needing a trail permit in order to get access? And 56% yes, and 44% no on that one. Financial implications, to be very honest with you, it's very tough to determine at this point in time. I think we still have to figure out, focus in on which particular option we want to look at. And from there, we can see if there is going to be a need there for review of the roads, which may have a bit of an implication. There's signage, obviously, that we're going to have to look at, and as well as the education component, depending on whatever we decide. So I think at this point, financial implications might be a little bit of a premature conclusion. So just to let you know, back in the trail master plan again, there was a mention that there was a trail development committee. And a trail development committee, although it was formal at sometimes, it really was not overly formal in more recent times. But it did indicate or suggested that here are some of the individuals that could be on this trail development committee. And it's basically a sounding board or a working group where you can kind of discuss and consider different options and have suggestions and come to conclusions as need be. Most of the individuals here have been contacted at some point in time by a former director as part of the review. Not all of them, however, it's been more of an informal process as part of it. That's not to say we can't go back to a more formal process as well. Now, also in that trail master plan and developed, or as it was developed, it made mention of motorized trail evaluation criteria. And it talked about ecological sustainability, physical sustainability, social sustainability, compliance and legislation, trespass to property, and tread lightly principle. Now, some of these, basically, if we're looking at the points to consider, they basically are going to be considered or were considered as part of this. So we're in the process of doing these and following basically that guide anyhow. Ecological sustainability, just the one thing we do want to make mention on that one, there is some of the proposed trails that would be crossing over some water courses, not really, more of a ditch that may have some seasonal flows of water on it. So there may be a need there to maybe get some viewpoints from the NVCA in terms of what their thoughts on that. I'm just putting it out there. Next steps. So as part of the report, I concluded it by saying, look, it says we still got some more work we got to do, and I gave some of the items I think that moving forward, staff is going to have to start reviewing. So option one, we got to look at the hours of operation on municipal roads. Speed considerations, we got to look at the risk management considerations, and I'm talking about the assessment of the roads as part of that. Signage needs and cost, we're going to have a draft bylaw as part of it. Do we want to have further public comment as part of it? Applicable to RV only and not, okay, so in this particular case here, applicable to RV only and not off-road motorcycles. We do have a big problem with off-road motorcycles on an enforcement end of things. And I think moving forward, I believe staff would advise you that we want to make sure that if we do move forward, it is very specific that it's for only ORVs. That's it, okay? If the province is looking at opening up off-road motorcycles, we'll deal with that next. Option 2, and this is where we're looking at some of the additional trails, the North Simcoe Rail Trail. Condition upgrades if needed for trail expansion on unopened road allowances, including cost implications, is something we're going to have to look at. We're going to have to look at the shared use considerations. There are some parts of these trails which have horseback riders on them. That we have, one of them is very well known for bike riding. So we want to make sure that we consider that as part of the shared use. And we'll also have to look at the environmental impact if that's going to be applicable. Option 3, pretty much the same as option 2 in terms of what we have to look at. Option 4 is status quo, no further development. If the will of council is that we just keep on in the agreement with COATV on the permitted roads of FLOS 4, Vigo, and FLOS 6, then there's not much more we need to look at. And option 5 is we'll hear what you say and come back to you at that. And that concludes this very quick presentation.
Thank you, Director. I'll open up to discussions and questions by council. This is an item that is on the agenda in the regular meeting. We'll pull it forward after question period because there are some people here in the audience who've traveled in this weather and no doubt would want to start returning in this inclement weather. So, questions before we finish this up and move to the regular meeting? Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, I've been away on vacation. I know you are the pulse of our township because you'll hear from the residents, both for and against this, and I would appreciate if you could share any update with us that you've heard.
With respect to this matter? Well, I'm sure we've all heard discussion. It's a topic that we continue to hear about. I think the report is a good report. I think it's interesting to see the results of the surveys. I'm encouraged at the number of responses in the survey. I'm going to be turning over the chair and proposing an option in the regular meeting, which I'll get into discussing at that point in time. I think that there's, as a preamble to that, I think that there's, taking the survey into consideration, there's room for compromise and there's room for moving forward with this in a progressive way, but in a way that tests, in the form of a pilot, an option that would allow for more travel between the townships and do it in a way that would afford the ability for these off-road vehicles to be able to be used easier, and yet take into consideration areas where they shouldn't travel. So I'll leave it at that and open it up. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Thank you, Nick, for the presentation. Excellent presentation. I know there's some restricted areas, like from baseline, concession 7, unopened road allowance, from the baseline, concession 7 through to 93. I know the people back in there had a lot of problems with ATVers, and anyways, we ended up closing that off. Another stretch was Old Second Road. You'd come off Mill Street, come up behind Campbell Court. That was another. There were some restricted areas that I would like to see stay in place and keep that enforced. And that's one thing I'd like to see. I kind of leaning towards option 2. And I'd like to know what Wasaga Beach, how are they handling it? And correct me if I'm wrong, but they've opened it up, have they not? Like, I know I've been out there lots of times, and you know, I pull into a parking lot and somebody pulls right up beside me with an ATV. They're all dressed. Safety, ensuring safety, those are all things I think moving forward. Knowing again how Wasaga Beach is doing it, I think I agree with what the mayor said. There's room there where we can move forward with this. Cost is another thing. Implement that. I would like to see this move forward and open this up here. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Any response, Director, before I go to?
No, just through Mayor Allen to Councillor Ritchie. Yeah, in terms of how it occurred with both Wasaga Beach and Ormadante, actually, I made reference to Ormadante because, you know what, their end of it, it was a long process. It started in 2013 as well. And in 2018, they did allow that first little bit. And they had a 1-year pilot project, and now it's opened up a little bit more as well. So I think in the case of Wasaga Beach and Ormadante, they've seen that maybe some initial concerns that were considered, they didn't find those initial concerns, or they were not any that they were concerned with, so they did open up a bit more.
Follow on?
Yes, please. And just speaking about that, you talked there in your presentation about some roads there, how wide is the shoulders, very, very important. If we were to further that, maybe there's some roads we shouldn't be allowing them on, and others that are fine. I think a lot of our roads are fine, but if we needed to reach out with some of the groups and just check some of these, and some roads might not be able to, might be a safety factor. We want to make sure that they can move throughout the township and be safe while they're doing it. I support that. Thank you.
Councilor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just with respect to them operating on the roadway, Ontario Regulation 316/3, although it does say that they're expected to travel the same direction on the shoulder, it also does provide in Section 24(2), off-road vehicle may be driven on a roadway in the same direction as traffic using the same side of the highway if A, there's no shoulder, B, the shoulder of the highway is obstructed and cannot be used, which you alluded to. Also C, the shoulder is not wide enough to allow the off-road vehicle to be driven with all its tires remaining completely off the roadway. So there is an opportunity for them to actually use the paved portion if they have to. And we still do have in our township a number of roads that are all gravel, so these are fairly low-impact tires on these vehicles, so unless somebody's really doing something other than just driving down the road, I don't expect there'd be a whole lot of maintenance to go along with it, which seems to be the case in some of these other jurisdictions. As far as getting to the trails is concerned, I don't want to leave certain other residents out in the cold by simply alluding just to that particular aspect. We do have farmers that utilize these vehicles to check fields, to get from point A to point B. A lot of these farmers can't get out in the field sometimes with their pickup trucks, or they want to travel through the fields to get to another plot of land to check crops or whatever, and they often do use the roadway. I see them quite often on my road, and I know they're not supposed to be out there now, but for them it's just a matter of getting their job and their work done. I think it also puts us at a bit of a disadvantage for people who like to engage in other recreational activities where these vehicles are used, such as hunting. And there are a number of places in the township where people do go hunt, and some of them quite often do use the ATVs. And there might also be opportunity for people to utilize the ATVs and to get into town to those amenities. There's a lot of money that goes into these vehicles, and there's people out there that do have money in their pocket that can come and spend some of that in Elmvale or say Hillsdale, buying gas, buying food and whatnot. So I actually am leaning more and more towards option 2. I would like to see a manner in which by our residents don't necessarily need a trailer if they do belong to the trail system to be able to get out to it from their house if they live nearby, rather than have to purchase a trailer just to take their ATV to that location. And I'd be very, very interested in knowing what Wasaga Beach's experience has been, because they've pretty well opened it right up, not only to the roadways, but also to municipal property, the beach. It'd be very interesting to see what's happened, because I think they changed it from what I was looking at 2016, and then they opened it up again in 2019. So I don't know if you have any information with respect to that, Director Ippolito, but it'd be interesting to see whether or not the incidents went up or down. I think some of our complaints for people driving on private property are due to the fact that they're not permitted on the roadway. And quite often, I think some of them are accessing private property, to get from point B to point B, point A to point B, because they cannot get on the road to travel. So, like I say, I think I'm more in support of option 2 presently.
Director Ippolito?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Over to Councillor Cabral. Just a couple of points. Just thank you very much for the clarifying of the OREG 31603 in reference to going over it. Yes, you are 100% acknowledged. You are correct. It does say where the shoulder is not wide enough. Yes, you can go on the travel portion as part of it. As far as Wasaga Beach's experience with it, I don't unfortunately have a detailed review. Just our questions were more along the lines of did you review it? Yes, and maintenance really at that. However, with that being said, as we got to do some additional work on this, we can always bring it forward in the future where we can get down into the nitty-gritty on it. The other item, just in terms of the farm vehicles, and just a point to, so the farm vehicles through the through the Off-Road Vehicle Act, okay, Off-Road Vehicle Act, not the regulations, they do permit someone who is using for farm purposes to travel on a highway. However, they have to have a slow-moving vehicle sign on it, so they're okay. However, with that being said, and then we were talking with some of our staff, and there's no reason why we can't put some additional clarification on that if we were to move forward with a bylaw where we can just highlight that, even for the sake of enforcement purposes. That way it's a lot easier than trying to find it out later on or filtering through everything. Thank you.
Follow on?
Thank you. With respect to the farmers, I agree with you. It's just I don't know how you would differentiate just by the triangle sign what it would be. But I did read some case law where someone tried to say that the ATV was being considered an implement of husbandry and therefore was not applicable in that respect. And on appeal, the judge said that by definition it was not an implement of husbandry, and the poor fella got fined. So I appreciate you bringing forward the part about the slow-moving sign there. Maybe that's what he needed to put on it at the time. Thanks.
Other comments? Councillor Hanna?
Thank you. The only difference I saw between, Director, between 2 and 3 was that 3 takes into consideration requests from the ATV clubs and add some trails. That was just one of my questions, and I know you'll answer that. But the other one was, when we heard people come forward in the past, one of the concerns was that if they want to get from the residence to a trail, they have to load their machine on a trailer and take it to that trail. Going forward, will there be any consideration to allow residents to travel a reasonable distance, whatever that is decided to be, to get from their residence in Springwater to a trail?
Director Ippolito?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. To Councillor Hanna. I'm just trying to think here on your last question regarding from your residence to your the trail system, and there was some wording, and what I've seen in Clearview. I don't want to say Clearview. It was actually not Ormadante. Sorry, it was Wasaga Beach, where it made mention regarding in residential or built-up areas. You were permitted to do it, but the wording was so specific where it was along the lines of, you're not taking that vehicle out for a joyride, you're going over to the trail. And unfortunately, I don't remember what the specific wording is on it, but it was such where it kind of insinuated that little Johnny driving down the road is not going to be able to ride down the road. Little Johnny's got to go over to the trail system as part of it. Okay. There was one other question, I'm sorry.
The comparison between options 2 and 3, I saw 3 as just simply taking into consideration requests from the ATV club.
Yeah. Mayor Allen to Councillor Hanna, 2 and 3 are so option 2 opens up a few of the North Simcoe Rail Trail and a couple of unopened road allowances. Option 3 is different in the point of it's very limited roadways. So it kind of is getting you over to Ormadonte, getting you over to Wasaga Beach, and just getting you over to Tiny Township. And so we're really focusing the traffic on certain roads only, as opposed to option 1 and 2, which is all municipal roads, go left, go right, it doesn't really matter as an approach.
Okay. All right, then we'll continue discussion of this in the regular meeting if there are no more questions. Thank you very much. Can I have a mover and a seconder to address the bylaw? Councillor Cabral, Councillor Chapman. That bylaw 219-104 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on December 18, 2019, listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? Carried. And adjourning the meeting, mover and seconder, Deputy Mayor Coghlan and Councillor Ritchie. The special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 5:59 p.m. to meet again in regular meeting on December 18th, 6:30 p.m. Council Chambers, Admin Center, Minnesing. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Resume in half an hour.